You really think you can just block a train and get away with it? I muttered under my breath as I gripped the steering wheel, the sun reflecting off the asphalt and bouncing into my eyes, painting everything in a harsh, blinding glare. The air smelled sharply of hot rubber and exhaust fumes, and every second felt stretched thin as I crested the small hill that led to the railroad crossing. There she was, Karen Whitmore, standing firmly in front of her black SUV, arms crossed, sunglasses glinting, a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and a sense of entitlement radiating off her in waves. The tires on her vehicle squeaked slightly as they pressed against the gravel, and I could hear the faint rattle of something metallic under her wheels whenever she shifted her weight. My pulse quickened as I instinctively slowed, the familiar rumble of the engine vibrating beneath my palms, mingling with the distant hum of an approaching train somewhere over the horizon. The tension built with each heartbeat, a rhythmic echo that seemed to synchronize with the faint click-click of the crossing signal in the distance. I leaned forward, scanning for any openings, any subtle hint that Karen might move, but her stance was unyielding, her expression smug, and her grip on the situation absolute. The summer heat made the air shimmer slightly above the asphalt, carrying with it the sense of warm tar and the faint tang of iron from the nearby tracks, a sensory overload that made my stomach tighten with anticipation. Every inch of the road, every pebble crunching beneath my tires, felt magnified as I tried to gauge her mood, the flicker of sunlight off her polished nails, the crisp rustle of her designer blouse as a breeze caught it for a moment. I tapped the horn lightly, a polite warning, but she barely reacted, merely tilting her head as if studying me, judging me silently. The world seemed to narrow down to the small triangle of asphalt between her SUV and the edge of the tracks, the distant gleam of steel glinting with promise, the soft hiss of the approaching train almost imperceptible yet omnipresent in the back of my mind. I could feel the heat rising behind my eyes, a mix of frustration, determination, and the subtle thrill of knowing a plan was forming, the gears in my mind turning with careful precision. Every scent, sound, and movement mattered, her tapping foot, the creak of her car door as she shifted, the slight swish of her hair catching sunlight. I swallowed hard, gripping the wheel tighter, tasting the metallic tang of adrenaline at the back of my throat, as the scene unfolded like a slow-motion reel, each frame packed with tension, every detail a note in a symphony of anticipation, and I knew in that precise moment that the next 5 minutes would define everything that came after. I leaned back slightly in my seat, keeping my eyes locked on Karen as she shifted her weight from one foot to the other, tapping her polished fingernails against the door of the SUV. Every subtle movement she made seemed amplified in the heat of the midday sun, the reflection off the chrome trim catching my attention and holding it, forcing me to notice the slight tension in her shoulders, the way she tilted her head as if calculating my next move. I could hear the faint whir of the distant train, a steady, low hum growing louder with each passing second, mingling with the soft rustle of the wind through the nearby pine trees and the occasional chirp of a sparrow flitting across the asphalt shoulder. I adjusted the mirror, catching a glimpse of the small digital display on the dashboard, the numbers ticking away slowly, each second bringing a subtle tightening in my chest as the pressure mounted. The tires of my car pressed against the warm asphalt with a steady, familiar friction, a tactile reminder of control and stability, grounding me as I observed Karen more closely. Her sunglasses reflected the glare of the sun back at me, creating a brief moment of blinding light that forced me to blink and recalibrate my focus, every blink synchronized with the pulse of my heartbeat. I noticed the faint scent of sunscreen mixed with leather from her SUV, a sensory detail that seemed to linger in the air, clinging to the heat radiating from the asphalt. The subtle creak of the car door as she shifted slightly, the faint scuff of her shoes on the gravel. All became pieces of a puzzle I was assembling in real time, a mental map of her intentions and possible next actions. I took a slow, controlled breath, letting the warm air fill my lungs, the slight tang of dust and iron from the nearby tracks catching the edges of my awareness. My hands gripped the steering wheel firmly, the leather textured and familiar under my fingers, grounding me, giving me a sense of readiness, a readiness that was matched by the steady rhythm of the engine beneath me. I allowed my eyes to scan the area beyond Karen, noting the clear stretch of tracks and the small signal lights blinking intermittently, a subtle reminder of the approaching train and the tight window of time that demanded both patience and precision. The atmosphere seemed to thrum with anticipation, each sensory input layering over the next, creating a vivid, almost tangible tension that made the moment feel elongated, drawn out, yet intensely focused. I could sense the weight of observation, the subtle pressure of being watched and being tested in a standstill confrontation, each microsecond carrying significance, a blend of impatience, strategy, and the quiet thrill of the unseen plan forming, the kind of plan that required attention to every detail, every sound, smell, and visual cue, all converging in a single, heightened state of awareness that I knew would dictate the next sequence of events. I could feel the heat of the asphalt radiating through the soles of my shoes as I shifted my gaze from Karen to the faint glimmer of the train tracks stretching beyond her SUV, the steel rails catching the sunlight and glinting like a promise. Every subtle sound seemed amplified in the stillness, the soft hum of distant traffic, the rustle of dry leaves stirred by a light breeze, the occasional caw of a crow overhead, all layering over the faint vibration from my engine idling beneath me. My mind raced, mapping out every movement she made, the slight twitch of her lips as she surveyed me, the way her hand hovered near the door handle as if ready to react. I leaned forward, hands steady on the wheel, feeling the texture of the leather and the cool metal of the gear shift, grounding me in the moment. The faint scent of warm tar mixed with the earthy aroma of surrounding pine trees created a sensory map of the location, each detail feeding into a mental ledger of possibilities and timing. I noticed how the sunlight bounced off her sunglasses in intermittent bursts, forcing me to blink and adjust, each blink a reminder of the fleeting window of opportunity that was closing steadily as the distant clatter of the train approached, soft at first, then growing with each heartbeat, syncing almost rhythmically with my own pulse. The gravel beneath her tires shifted slightly as she adjusted her stance, creating small, crisp sounds that punctuated the silence, and I could sense her growing impatience, a barely perceptible quiver in her posture that suggested subtle frustration beneath the confident facade. I exhaled slowly, letting the warm summer air fill my lungs, tasting the faint metallic edge from nearby rails, feeling the tension build in the muscles of my back and shoulders as I anticipated the next moments. Every detail mattered, the faint click of the signal light blinking in the distance, the shimmer of heat waves rising from the road, the subtle sway of leaves catching sunlight intermittently. I allowed myself a measured, deliberate calm, analyzing the subtle dance of shadows and light across her face, the slight motion of her shoulders as she shifted weight from one foot to another, the precise placement of her hands on the SUV. My mind created a sequence of possible outcomes, each step informed by these observations, the anticipation coiling inside me, electric and tangible, a quiet storm of focus and strategy, knowing that the next few minutes would require precision, patience, and an acute awareness of every sight, sound, and smell that surrounded this unexpected standoff, all of it converging to create a moment suspended in tension and rich with potential for what was to come. The sun climbed higher, casting a golden haze over the asphalt and making the chrome accents on Karen Whitmore's SUV glint sharply, each reflection a subtle, almost hypnotic reminder of her presence in the middle of the tracks. I could feel the warmth radiating through the car, seeping into my clothes, the smell of heated rubber and pine needles mixing in the air, creating a tangible tension that seemed to thrum through every fiber of the scene. My hands remained steady on the steering wheel, fingertips brushing the cool leather, feeling the minute vibrations of the engine beneath me, a grounding rhythm against the rising anxiety and anticipation. The faint hum of the distant train persisted, growing in intensity, blending with the soft whir of the signal mechanism, the occasional metallic creak from her SUV as she adjusted her stance, and the whisper of wind threading through the trees lining the track, all layering into a complex soundscape that I absorbed carefully, cataloging every note. I noticed the subtle movements of her hands, the way her fingers traced the edges of the door frame, the gentle tap of her heel against the asphalt, each detail signaling impatience, confidence, or perhaps a flicker of doubt. My eyes flicked to the gauge cluster in the dashboard, monitoring the minutes and seconds with precise attention, the small red needles moving steadily, a constant reminder of the window closing with the approaching train. I could sense her scanning the horizon, the sunlight bouncing off her glasses into my eyes momentarily, forcing me to squint and recalibrate, each blink punctuating the anticipation that hung thick in the air. The scent of warm leather from the car seats mixed with the tang of distant iron from the rails, creating a subtle sensory anchor that kept me present and focused. I felt the steady pressure of the tires on the hot asphalt, grounding me, reminding me of control, and I shifted slightly, letting my body align with the mental map forming, noting the shadows stretching from her SUV and how they elongated with each passing minute. The small gravel under the edge of the SUV crunched faintly as she shifted her weight again, a reminder of the human element in this otherwise mechanical tableau. I exhaled slowly, drawing in the summer air, the faint scent of asphalt and pine needles mingling in my nose, allowing the anticipation to sharpen my awareness rather than overwhelm it, feeling the fine balance between patience and readiness, knowing that the next actions had to be precise and deliberate, each moment a calculated step in the silent negotiation of space, presence, and timing that would ultimately determine the unfolding of the events in this suspended, sun-drenched confrontation. I shifted slightly in my seat, feeling the warmth of the sun through the windshield as it bounced off the asphalt, highlighting the slight sheen of sweat on my forearms and the leather of the steering wheel beneath my hands. Every minor detail around Karen Whitmore became more pronounced, from the subtle tilt of her head to the barely perceptible tightening of her jaw, each movement signaling her confidence and her patience being tested simultaneously. The faint hum of the distant train continued to rise, blending with the soft rustle of the surrounding trees and the intermittent chirp of birds, a layered soundtrack that kept my senses alert and attuned to every nuance of the standoff. I adjusted my posture, feeling the texture of the seat and the slight give of the tires on the asphalt, grounding me as I considered the strategic elements at play, the positioning of her SUV, the small gap between her tires and the edge of the tracks, and the angles of the shadows that stretched and shrank with the movement of the sun. The scent of warm tar mingled with the pine-scented breeze, creating a sensory map that heightened my awareness, making me acutely conscious of the environment, the passing seconds, and the potential for subtle shifts that could alter the dynamics entirely. Karen tapped her fingers lightly against the frame of her vehicle, a soft rhythm that contrasted with the low hum of the distant train, drawing my attention to the faint signs of impatience that she tried to mask beneath her composed exterior. I could see her scanning the horizon repeatedly, sunglasses reflecting patches of sunlight back at me, momentarily blinding and forcing micro-adjustments in my focus, every blink a synchronized pause with my racing heartbeat. The small gravel under her tires shifted slightly as she adjusted her weight again, producing crisp, sharp sounds that punctuated the otherwise stillness, each noise becoming a part of a mental ledger I was compiling to anticipate her next moves. I exhaled slowly, drawing in the warm, dry air that carried subtle hints of iron from the nearby tracks, letting it fill my lungs and steady my concentration, reminding myself that the next few minutes required not just awareness, but precise timing and measured patience. The sun glinted off the metallic elements of the tracks ahead, creating a visual rhythm that matched the rising intensity of the distant train, a silent cue in the unfolding scenario that demanded every ounce of observation and foresight I could muster, making this suspended moment feel simultaneously endless and fleeting, each detail holding weight, each sound and smell and visual cue contributing to a complex, heightened awareness that would guide the actions about to unfold. I took a slow, deliberate breath, feeling the warmth of the summer air fill my lungs as my eyes stayed fixed on Karen Whitmore, every subtle shift in her posture catalogued and analyzed. The sun beat down on the asphalt, making it shimmer faintly, and the reflections off the SUV's windows caught my attention repeatedly, forcing me to adjust my focus as if each glint were a pulse in the rhythm of the standoff. I could hear the soft scrape of gravel under her tires as she shifted weight, the faint click of her sunglasses adjusting on her face, and the gentle sway of the trees lining the tracks, all merging into a rich symphony of anticipation that heightened every sense. The distant hum of the train continued its approach, low and steady at first, then gradually growing in presence, a subtle reminder that time was pressing, that every second counted, and that precision would determine the outcome of this delicate balance. I let my hands rest lightly on the wheel, feeling the texture of the leather, the slight vibrations of the engine beneath me, grounding my awareness while my mind ran through potential sequences and contingencies, calculating the safest, most effective path forward. The heat carried with it the faint scent of asphalt and the metallic tang of the nearby tracks, blending with the pine-scented breeze to create a complex sensory environment that demanded acute attention and careful timing. I noticed the slight furrow of Karen's brow, the subtle shift of her shoulders as she adjusted stance, her body language betraying confidence tinged with impatience, and I used these cues to refine my mental map of the unfolding situation. The sunlight made patterns across the pavement, shadows stretching and contracting as the day moved forward, providing visual markers that synchronized with the hum of the train, the rustle of leaves, and the faint hiss of tires against gravel. Each element combined into a precise, cinematic tableau, a dynamic interplay of sensory inputs that required careful observation and strategic anticipation. I allowed my gaze to sweep the surrounding area, noting the faint outline of distant traffic, the shimmer of the tracks, the small dips and rises of the asphalt, each detail contributing to a calculated understanding of space and timing. My heartbeat matched the rhythm of my observations, steady and controlled, a quiet counterpoint to the rising tension of the scenario, knowing that every sense, every micro-detail, and every measured decision would converge in the moments to come, shaping the outcome of this sunlit, suspended confrontation with deliberate clarity and mindful precision. I pressed my foot lightly on the brake, feeling the familiar give of the pedal beneath my shoe, and watched as Karen Whitmore continued to stand her ground, her posture unwavering yet subtly betraying a flicker of uncertainty. The sunlight bounced off the polished surfaces of her SUV, casting sharp reflections onto the asphalt, and I noticed how the shadows of the surrounding trees stretched across the road, shifting slowly with the movement of the sun, creating a subtle, almost hypnotic rhythm that mirrored the growing intensity of the approaching train. I could hear the distant, low hum of the locomotive rising steadily, blending with the gentle rustle of pine needles stirred by a light breeze, the faint metallic click of the crossing signal, and the soft shuffle of gravel as her shoes adjusted position, each sound layering over the next to form a complex tapestry of sensory input that demanded full attention. My hands gripped the steering wheel with measured firmness, feeling the texture of the leather and the slight vibrations of the idling engine, anchoring me in the moment and reinforcing a sense of readiness as I calculated the next moves in my mind. The warm summer air carried the tang of asphalt, the faint scent of iron from the nearby rails, and the subtle aroma of pine, all mingling to heighten awareness and create a mental map of the environment that extended beyond the immediate visual field. I noticed the tiniest shifts in Karen's stance, the slight narrowing of her eyes as she tracked my movements, the almost imperceptible tightening of her shoulders, and the way her fingers brushed against the door frame of the SUV, each micro-detail a signal in the silent negotiation unfolding on the sun-baked asphalt. My focus expanded to the distant horizon where the train's polished rails gleamed in the sunlight, a visual guide that drew my eyes forward while the hum grew steadily, a persistent reminder of the time-sensitive nature of the situation. Every microsecond became a measure of patience, every sensory input a note in a symphony of anticipation, from the distant bird calls to the soft hiss of tires on gravel, the warm heat of the sun, and the faint vibration beneath my feet. I exhaled slowly, letting the summer air fill my lungs, grounding myself in the combined awareness of sight, sound, and smell, understanding that the next actions would require precision, patience, and a deep, intuitive sense of timing, the kind that transforms ordinary moments into sequences of clarity and control, where every detail from the glint of sunlight to the hum of distant metal converges into a heightened, cinematic awareness that guides decisions with quiet confidence and deliberate intent. I felt the subtle shift in tension as Karen Whitmore's gaze followed mine, her posture slightly more rigid now, and the warm summer air seemed to thicken, carrying with it the mingled scents of asphalt, pine, and distant iron from the rails. The sun continued to climb, casting long, sharp shadows that stretched across the road and bounced off the polished surfaces of her SUV, reflections that played across the asphalt like intermittent signals, guiding my perception of space and movement. I could hear the low, steady hum of the approaching train growing more pronounced, mingling with the gentle rustle of leaves stirred by the occasional breeze, the soft click of the signal mechanisms, and the faint shuffle of her shoes against the gravel, each sound a cue in the complex rhythm of anticipation building around us. My hands rested firmly on the steering wheel, feeling the slight vibrations of the idling engine beneath my palms, grounding me as I processed every detail. The angle of her sunglasses catching sunlight, the subtle tightening of her shoulders, the micro-movements of her fingers brushing the door frame, the interplay of shadow and light across the asphalt. I drew a slow, deliberate breath, letting the warm air fill my lungs, and noticed how the distant rails glimmered, reflecting the sun in a steady, linear pulse that mirrored the rhythm of the approaching train and helped synchronize my focus with the unfolding scenario. The gravel under her tires shifted slightly as she moved, producing small, crisp noises that punctuated the otherwise stillness, and I catalogued each one carefully, building a mental map of her position, the vehicle, the space between us, and the environment beyond. The heat radiating from the asphalt created subtle waves that distorted the visual field slightly, making the reflections dance and emphasizing the intensity of the standoff, every ripple of light contributing to my awareness of timing and spatial relations. I noticed the almost imperceptible furrow in her brow, the narrowing of her eyes as she continued to assess my movements, her body language a mixture of confidence and growing awareness that her control was being quietly challenged. The scent of sun-warmed leather from my seats mingled with the tang of iron and pine, grounding my attention and anchoring my awareness in a web of sensory input that spanned sight, sound, and smell. Every blink, every minor adjustment of posture, every flicker of sunlight or shadow became part of a precise observational sequence, guiding my internal calculation of timing and opportunity. I felt a growing clarity and patience, a sense that the next moments required deliberate observation, subtle anticipation, and careful alignment of perception, each sensory detail layering into a comprehensive understanding that would shape the precise unfolding of events in this sunlit, tense, and fully immersive confrontation. I felt the culmination of tension settle into a sharp clarity as I kept my eyes on Karen Whitmore, noting the subtle shift in her stance and the faint narrowing of her eyes as the sunlight bounced off the SUV and painted patterns on the asphalt. The distant hum of the train had grown into a steady, resonant presence, its rhythmic pulse blending with the soft whisper of pine trees swaying in the summer breeze and the occasional scrape of gravel beneath her tires, each element weaving into a rich, layered soundscape that filled the space between us. I pressed my hands firmly on the steering wheel, feeling the familiar texture of leather and the slight vibrations of the engine, each pulse a grounding rhythm that aligned with the calculated anticipation building in my mind. The heat radiating from the asphalt carried a mixture of warm tar and faint metallic notes from the tracks, mingling with the pine-scented air to create a vivid sensory map that heightened awareness and sharpened focus. I noticed the smallest details, the flicker of sunlight across her sunglasses, the subtle tension in her shoulders, the minute adjustments of her fingers against the door frame, the way shadows shifted and elongated across the pavement as the sun arced higher in the sky. Every blink and micro-movement became a signal, a cue to the next sequence of thought and action, each one recorded in the mental ledger of strategy that had been building for minutes. The distant rails shimmered under the sun, guiding my eyes forward while the train's approach added a tangible rhythm to the scene, a reminder that patience and precision were essential. I could feel a heightened clarity settle over me, the culmination of observation, calculation, and quiet anticipation, all converging into a deliberate readiness that made every sensory detail, from the hum of the engine to the faint rustle of leaves, inform the next move. The subtle crunch of gravel beneath her tires punctuated the scene, the warmth of sunlight on my skin, the texture of the wheel under my fingers, and the mingling scents of asphalt, pine, and iron created a multidimensional awareness that filled every sense and guided my mind. I exhaled slowly, letting the summer air steady my focus, knowing that every micro-detail had its place in the unfolding moment, every sound and reflection and shadow aligning in a precise rhythm, the kind of heightened, cinematic clarity where patience, observation, and strategic anticipation converge into the perfect timing for the actions about to follow, a quiet, deliberate orchestration of presence, perception, and intent that would define the resolution of this sunlit confrontation.